G5 Hive and our Worker Bee series, where we dive deep into the G5 college football landscape and we talk with folks that know the teams best. Today, we'll be taking a look at the Liberty Flames, who finished 13-1 last season, where they were the G5 representatives in the New Year's Six and just wrapped up their 2024 spring practice with their spring game on March 2nd. We have a special guest joining us today. Welcome to the show, Jon Manson. Hopefully that was a great highlight and remembering of how the season went last year.
Yeah, it really was. That was a lot of fun watching those replays and brought it back a lot of memories. Fun for Liberty fans. It was a fun year under Coach Chadwell, first year with him at the helm.
Yeah, great start to the year. So, Jon, you are the founder and sports reporter for A Sea of Red at Sea of Red on X. If you need to follow him, that's where you can find him in all things Liberty. Jon, let's get right into what the people want to know. So, with the coaching staff returning for year two and there being some consistency, there um, have there been any new wrinkles that have been introduced on offense and or defense?
Yeah, I don't think so. Obviously, Liberty just concluded their spring practice session March 2nd. Saturday was a spring game, and so they're done pretty early. But yeah, I don't think there's going to be a ton of new wrinkles, especially on the offensive side. You got, I know we'll get into it a little bit more, but Caden Salter returns at quarterback, and a lot of key returners. All the running backs are back. Most of the offensive line's back. Tight ends are back. A few receivers are back. So there won't be a lot change. I'm sure they'll have some, wrinkles here and there sprinkled in, right? Just to keep the opposing teams, defenses and their staffs, kind of on their heels a little bit. But I think for the most part, it'll be pretty similar. For the defense, I do think there will be some changes. Coach Chadwell talked about how in 23, Liberty played a lot of man coverage. I think you'll see more zone. Part of that due to personnel. Liberty lost a couple corners in the portal that went to P5 schools, and it's not always so easy to replace some of those positions. So it might be a little bit of some change on that side of the ball, but for the most part, I think it's pretty much going to be a lot, very similar to what Liberty ran in 23.
That's good to hear. And they ran. You got to play Oregon in the New Year's Six Bowl. What was the main takeaway that the coaching staff maybe learned from that game, or what have you seen maybe adjustment wise this spring?
I think the main thing that they learned that we learned is Oregon's really dang good, right? I mean, this is a team that was, one game, one touchdown away, less than a touchdown, really away from playing in the college football playoff, and obviously Washington made it to the championship game. That was their only loss, losing to them twice, including the Pac-12 championship game. But Oregon's really good. They had a lot of speed. Liberty could not match up with their speed. That was the biggest takeaway, I think, for the coaching staff, especially on defense. Like, Liberty had you knew Liberty wasn't going to be able to stop them going into it, you kind of expected that was going to be tough. But once the game got going and Oregon kind of worked out the kinks there the first couple of drives, you knew that Liberty wasn't going to be able to stop them. And I think a lot of that had to do with the speed on the field. Liberty just couldn't match that. So I think that's the biggest thing as Liberty hopes to continue to get to that level and to compete at in the CFP, as we move into 2024 with the expanded CFP, that they're going to have to improve their speed, especially on defense. And I think that's something that they focused on, through the transfer portal, and they'll continue to look at as they recruit out of high school as well.
All right.
All right. So last preseason, there was a lot of buzz around running back Von Blue. He got injured in week 3 against Buffalo. What can you tell us about his injury and recovery? And was he able to practice this spring and how he looked, if so?
Sure. So yeah, there was a lot of hype around Von Blue. True freshman last year, came in the spring, was really the team's best running back in the spring, and unfortunately he suffered like you mentioned there in Buffalo game 3. separated shoulder and caused him to miss a good chunk of the season. He did return at the end of the year. He played briefly in the conference championship game against New Mexico State, and he might have gotten a few snaps against Oregon. But by that point in time, Liberty's offense was kind of well established, and they kind of he was just coming back, getting his feet wet again, so they kind of limited his reps. But also, unfortunately, he suffered another injury this spring. Early on, he did start off practicing, but I think he might have gotten a week of practice under his belt and then suffered another injury. I don't know exactly what that injury is, but he should be good to go full strength by the time training camp rolls around. But he's a guy that he did get to redshirt, played in 4 games plus the bowl game. So he did keep he'll be a redshirt freshman this year. But he's a guy Liberty expects a lot of, with Coach Chadwell and that kind of spread / triple option attack that they use on offense. They a lot of times have 2 backs on the field and an A back and a B back, and Blue is more the guy that can get out in space and make plays on the perimeter, maybe even in the passing game, catching the ball out of the backfield. So there's a lot of hope. Aaron Bedgood was a guy that kind of filled that role when Blue went down. Bedgood was originally a slot receiver, a transfer from Coastal Carolina last year, and then he went into more of that running back role that Blue vacated with his injury. But Bedgood is he applied for a medical red shirt to be able to come back another year from couple injuries he suffered back at Coastal, to get an additional, I think it would be his 6th year of eligibility in 24. It was originally denied. I think they're going through an appeal process, but right now it looks like he probably won't be in the fold for Liberty in 24. So it'll go back to Blue. So if those of you that watch Liberty football in 23, which you saw Aaron Bedgood do a lot of in 23, that'll be kind of the role that Blue would be kind of pegged into, provided he can stay healthy.
Yeah, that'll be a big sigh of relief if he can make it through a year unscathed with injury. Talking about injuries, other than quarterback position, what do you think is the biggest drop off from the starters to the backups? And that could be on the defensive side of the ball, where, hey, we just can't take any more injuries here before we're really affecting what we do as a team.
Yeah, I mean, I think defensive line is always one of those positions, especially at the G5 level, is you just don't have a ton of depth at that level. Typically, most teams. So I think that certainly would be one for Liberty, is the defensive line on the defensive side of the ball. I think on the offensive side of the ball, it's really receiver. There's a few guys that you can lean on, but last year Liberty had injuries at that position. Reese Smith, Victor Jones, 2 transfers that came in that were supposed to be part of that main core of receivers, that they got injured back in the summer and missed the entire season. And fortunately for Liberty, CJ Daniels kind of emerged, but now he transferred to LSU, so Liberty's trying to figure out who's that next guy, and Reese Smith and Victor Jones are coming back, but they didn't go through spring ball again, still recovering from that injury. So I think receiver is the one position on offense, and then the defensive line on the defense that injuries could really kind of derail. I don't want to say derail the season, but could derail the production expected from those 2 positions.
We were talking beforehand a little bit about the effects of transfer portal and G5, and this past portal, Caden Salter kind of tested the waters, I guess, a little bit. Ultimately, he ended up and decided to return to Liberty. Was there any lingering effects from that, or any kind of effects maybe on team chemistry with him kind of, with that, or anything that you might have noticed?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's obviously honestly a fair question, and something that is to be of concern, especially from a position like that. I mean, it's a quarterback, team leader, offensive leader, a guy that's getting in the huddle and trying to tell his team what to do, and get them to jump on his back and kind of let him lead the way. So that certainly could have been something to be worried about. I think a couple things there that I don't think it's going to be much of an issue for the Flames going forward. Is it was only like a 3-day period that he was in the portal, so it wasn't like it drug out for a month and he was detached from the team for that period of time. I mean, it was just 2 or 3 days, and it was right after the Fiesta Bowl, so they had all gone home for the holiday breaks and things. So I don't think being there in person and him being away from the team, that wasn't an effect. And also, Coach Chadwell talked about how impressed he has been with Salter in the spring, as far as not just his play on the field, but off the field, and his leadership ability and his ability to get the team, galvanize it. And you saw it in the spring game. One of the reserve quarterbacks made a nice play in the spring game, scored a touchdown, and Salter was the first player on the field, running across the field to congratulate him, meet him on the field, and celebrate with him. So I think that's just a glimpse into Salter's bought into the team, and the team is still connected with him and through him. So personally, I don't think it's going to be an issue. But again, once you get into the season, you never know what's going to happen. But I think now that happened, first week of January, we're a couple months removed from that. Once you get to September, the kids won't even be thinking about that when they get out there on the field.
So running back Quentin Cooley had an impressive breakout performance last season, rushing for over 1,400 yards and 16 touchdowns. Do you think he can repeat a performance like that, or will we see more of that shared backfield with Blue and Lucas both healthy?
Yeah, I mean, Liberty ended up leading the entire country in 2023 in rushing yards per game. So I think, nobody would have expected that, especially, you got teams like Air Force and other, service academies that typically lead the country in rushing. But Liberty was able to do that. And in large part due to Quentin Cooley, transfer from Wake Forest. And it's kind of funny because a year ago now, I probably would have said running back was one of the biggest question marks for this team going into the season because – Day Hunter, you go back a couple years ago, was the team's top running back, and he ended up going in the portal, and I think he ended up playing XFL and did not transfer.
Yeah, I think he's with the Arlington Renegades. Yeah,
I believe you're correct. So it was him, and then a couple other guys that were in the room with him, kind of exhausted their eligibility or whatever the case may be, and so we, as Liberty fans, Liberty did not know what they were going to have, what to expect out of the running back room. But Quentin Cooley, transfer from Wake Forest, came in and he's kind of been dubbed the bowling ball. He's a kind of low to the ground guy, but he's big and he's physical runner. Like, he's not the fastest guy, but it's very hard for him to be brought down for a loss or even for no gain. Typically, if he's getting to, getting hit 2 or 3 yards beyond the line of scrimmage, he's falling forward for another 2 or 3. So that's where he got a lot of his yardage. To expect him to do what he did last year, 1,400 yards and 14 touchdowns or whatever the numbers were, that'd be a lot. And I think going into the year last year, and I would think that would be the case again this year, is I think it'd be more of a hybrid role. I think if they stay healthy, again, this goes back to talking about Von Blue and trying to stay healthy. If Blue can stay healthy, Billy Lucas is the other running back. It's kind of the three-headed monster, if you will. They also got a guy, Caden Williams, a true freshman who is there this spring and looked really good, guy out of Georgia. But James Jointer, another guy further down the depth chart. But those three, Lucas, Blue, and Cooley, if they can all stay healthy, I think Liberty would probably prefer those touches to be a little bit more balanced. Maybe you end up with Cooley getting right at 1,000 yards, and then Blue and Lucas each get around 400 yards or something. I'm just kind of making those up as we go. But then you also got Salter and he rushed for 1,000 yards last year too. So there's a lot of yardage that can be picked up and spread around. But I think in a perfect world, it'd be more evenly balanced. But yeah, Cooley's still obviously the lead back in that group.
Yeah, and I think that what you said makes sense. In Chadwell offense, he does spread it around, and I think 1,000 yards is definitely, I feel like, a pretty reasonable expectation. For Cooley this coming season. You alluded to it earlier about the wide receivers, and they seem to have taken one of the bigger hits on the team in terms of position group, whether it's players transferring out like C.J. Daniels or just players simply out of eligibility. Last season, C.J. Daniels led the room with a 1,000-yard season. You've kind of already said this is a position of concern. Is there anyone that you think might kind of step up and take over that wide receiver one role? Tyson Mobley came over from Coastal Carolina. Trayon Sibley's still there. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't really know the answer to it today, but we'll try to take a stab at it. I think Tyson Mobley, it's funny, the first play of the spring game, again, it was busted coverage was the biggest part of it, but it was a 60-yard, hook and go for Mobley, and Salter hit him right on the numbers, and he walked into the end zone for a 60-yard touchdown. First play of the spring game, you're like, oh, okay, CJ Daniels who type thing, but no, I don't think, Liberty certainly will miss a player the caliber of CJ Daniels. I mean, he's an NFL wide receiver, in my opinion. We'll see what he does at LSU this year. But I think Tyson Mobley, a guy transfer from Coastal, he's familiar with this offense under Coach Chadwell and offense coordinator Willie Korn, and he's a guy that I think you'll see a lot of. I think another name to keep an eye out for is Dante Lee, a transfer from Division II Shaw. I think he was an All-American as a freshman last year. And again, he's transferring up, not just, Division II up to Division I, but up to the FBS level and the G5 level and a pretty high level at the G5 level too, where Liberty was at last year. So, it's an adjustment for him. He was dinged up a little bit. I think he had a hamstring during the spring, so he missed some time. But he's a guy that's got he's very explosive, has the ability to make a big impact. I think they're hoping that he can kind of step into that CJ Daniels role, not necessarily that he'll be the number one receiver and that'll have 1,000 yards receiving, but I think the hope is that he can kind of be that X receiver, that go-to receiver. I think also Reese Smith, another guy, West Virginia transfer that, like I mentioned, he tore his ACL last summer, missed all of 23 season, and he missed spring again this year. Hopefully by September he'll be coming back into shape and rounding back into form and be ready to get back at it. But he's a slot type receiver, possession type receiver. You mentioned Trayon Sibley; he'll certainly factor in there. I think he's more of I don't know if Sibley is the type of guy that's like a go-to receiver, but he's a guy that can be a possession receiver, a sure-handed guy. He's not the fastest, he's not the tallest. But Liberty's got a lot of pieces at the receiver spot. We'll see how well they fit together once we get into the season. But I think Dante Lee's probably the biggest name to watch. Also, when we got the spring transfer portal window opening up here shortly too, that's another position I think Liberty will be, very aggressive in going after. Darius Copeland's another name I probably should mention. He's a guy that he was actually a late signee, one of those guys out of high school that kind of fell through the cracks. He had a torn ACL his senior year of high school and had some, low-level P5 interest and offers, like Maryland and maybe a couple like that. But he kind of slipped through the cracks after he tore his ACL. Liberty got him onto campus in the summer last year, and again coming off that torn ACL, he sat out all of 2023, and but he's back at it and ready to go. Was playing this spring, turned a lot of heads. And another slot type receiver, similar to Demario Douglas, Pop, who's with the Patriots, was a rookie this past year. Similar type player. Not going to say he's going to be that good, obviously, as a redshirt freshman, but he has that ability, that he's that type of player. But I think Liberty's really, Dante Lee's the one guy that could be that X receiver, that go-to receiver, that number one receiver that has the potential to go for 1,000 yards. We'll just have to see if it works out for him his first year at the FBS level, and then we'll also see, does somebody come available in the spring transfer portal.
Is Sibley, I'm assuming, still going to play the slot like he did last year?
Yeah, he plays the slot. I think he's really kind of plays on the outside some too. They go back and forth with him a little bit, and part of it, again, it's going to come down to is Reese Smith. It would be the starting slot receiver if he's 100% healthy. The West Virginia transfer I mentioned. Once the season starts, it's just a matter of will he be there by September? I mean, that would be 13 to 14 months following the ACL tear. You would think that would be enough time, but again, everybody, heals on their own time. So I think in a perfect world, he'd be the starting slot, and Trayon can kind of play a complementary role, play on the outside, play in the slot, kind of, bounce back and forth a little bit there.
Wow, a lot of nuggets there. Wow, that was great. Tight end Bentley Handshot seemed to be great in the red zone. and be a good threat there last season for the Flames. With the attrition there at wide receiver and trying to attack that position, and then they have to learn the playbook and get on the same page as Salter and all that. Do you think that he'll be more involved in the passing offense this season since he comes back?
Sure, I think the entire tight end room will be higher up the hierarchy, if you want to call it that way. Not just Hanshaw. Yeah, Hanshaw. Yes, he's the leader and the top guy there at tight end. But you also got Austin Henderson, another guy that was a transfer from Tennessee from Minnesota. He's from Tennessee, but a transfer from Minnesota a couple years back, and he was a complimentary piece last year. You also got Jacob Jenkins, another guy who got it was his second transfer, most recently from Coastal Carolina, came in last year and got his appeal denied and had to sit out the year. But those three guys, Jenkins, Hanshaw, and Henderson, kind of form a veteran group at tight end. And like you're mentioning there, I think with the question marks at receiver, they can be a safety valve for Salter. They also were heavily targeted in the red zone, like you kind of mentioned last year. I think that'll continue to happen. So I think you'll see, 2 or 3 tight ends, having decent numbers in the season. Again, I think it still goes back to who's your number one target in the pass game. I don't think those tight ends are necessarily someone Liberty wants to be that, but they can certainly help. And again, it may be that, your top receivers are, you got 4, 5, 6 guys that have 400 to 600 yards receiving, as opposed to one guy like a CJ Daniels last year that had over 1,000.
Yeah, kind of where the group as a whole kind of makes it up, where you don't have the one guy. Yeah, for sure. Switching things up a little bit, let's talk a little bit about the defense. So they lose one of their leaders, in the defense and the linebacker core, Tyron Dupree, who was their leading tackler last year. Is there anyone you see kind of stepping up, kind of taking over that leadership role, and or a linebacker stepping up to kind of take on that middle linebacker role?
Yeah, linebacker's kind of been a position that Liberty's kind of had a lot of question marks the last few years, unable to really recruit much there at a high school or anybody that really, stuck. I mean, they might get a guy in and he's around for a year or two and doesn't really pan out and transfers to a lower level. And that's unfortunately what's happened a lot for Liberty, really, since they moved to the FBS. They've been relying on, 1-year transfers to kind of be a plug gap. And that's going to be the case again this year. Tyron Dupree was a key piece, obviously conference defensive player of the year last year in Conference USA. And like you mentioned, leading tackler and really a leader more than anything. He was a leader on that defense. And I think you're going to see a few names. Liberty was really aggressive in that room in the transfer portal. Taylor Jackson from East Carolina comes in. He'll probably step into that, starting Mike spot that, Dupree leaves vacated. You also got Jamar Brown, another transfer from Coastal Carolina. Seems to keep mentioning that school, but of course that's where the coaching staff came from. So what do you expect? But yeah, Jamar Brown's another guy who kind of played that will linebacker spot. He could start. Jerome Jolly is another guy that started, half the year last year at linebacker. And I think he and Brown are kind of jockeying for that starting will spot. You'll see both of them out there. I think then also Joe Carter, whose name was slipping my mind there. Joe Carter is a former walk-on, earned a scholarship last year and kind of took the starting job from Jolly as the season wore on. But I think those 4 will kind of be your mainstays at linebacker. So Liberty might not have the, Tyron Dupree Conference Defensive Player of the Year at linebacker this year, but I think they'll have more depth. And hopefully, having more depth, they'll be able to kind of offset the loss of a guy like Dupree.
So adding to that, maybe it's one of the guys you mentioned there, but is there a defensive player that stood out this spring that you think could have a breakout season here in 2024?
It's funny. A guy that keeps coming to mind when I think about that, and I kind of chuckle to myself that I'm mentioning this guy as a guy that could have a breakout year, but it's TJ Bush. He was a freshman last year, defensive end. I mean, he was an All-American last year, a freshman All-American. So to say he could be a breakout this year in his second year is kind of like, really, are we saying that? But he was named most improved at his position this spring. He looked. I talked to him during the spring practice period and asked him, TJ, after such a strong freshman year, you're going into your second year with the program. What are you trying to improve upon? He said, "What he no hesitation. He said, my pass rush. I have to be a better pass rusher." And that was one of the things Liberty really struggled at as a defense last year was the ability to rush the passer. And if TJ is able to take that next step and kind of cause some havoc in opposing teams' backfields, that could be a huge step for this defense. Could really help that defensive backfield that might have a little, few holes, maybe a couple question marks going into the year. But we saw he made one great play. He made several great plays, but one specifically that stands out in the spring game where he kind of pushed his lineman back into the pocket, made the pocket collapse. The quarterback got the pass off. But then, and I saw a photo of the play, and TJ Bush looked like he was 35 plus inches off the ground and got his right paw up and batted it down. And it was just a very athletic play and something that I think Liberty fans will see more of from him moving into the second year in the program. And this is a guy that, I hate to even say this out loud, but he's probably a guy that Liberty's going to have to really fight hard to keep out of the portal moving forward just because of his raw athletic ability. And anytime you get a defensive lineman with that type of ability, especially young with multiple years of eligibility left, those power schools are going to come calling for him. But TJ Bush is a guy I look to kind of make a big impact, a kind of a breakout, even if you can call it that after he really had a good year last year if you look at his stats, but I think there's a lot of room for growth for him as well.
Before we start recording, we were talking a little bit about the quarterbacks and the future. And clearly, this year, this is Salter's team. But, and he could, after the end of this year, go to the NFL draft. And so to kind of look to that future a little bit, they brought in Ryan Berger, transfer from App State, who, I think last year, this time, App State was really excited about, started the year as their starter, right? And then kind of, for lack of a better word, got Wally pipped, and Joey Aguilar kind of took off. But so they bring in Ryan Berger from App State. They have a true freshman that you had mentioned, and I had read some things on that they're really excited about. Early enrollee Jaden Bradford. Can you tell us a little bit more about them and how spring practice went for those two guys? And if you think one of those guys is the future more so than the other?
Sure. So I think I think Liberty's coaching staff is kind of planning on Salter, obviously having a great season. And if he has another year like he did last year and that type of success, I think, it would make sense for him to go pro, even though he has another year of eligibility, but that just makes sense. So I think Liberty's coaching staff's kind of going into this year thinking, we got one more year of Salter and then we'll see what happens. And, that's in this offense, the quarterback runs a lot. And you never know. You're only one play away. That's how the saying goes, right? One play away from your backup being your guy. So Liberty, Jonathan Bennett transferred out after last year. He's kind of been a backup the last few years in the program, and he's at the Citadel where he'll probably earn that starting job down there. And good for him. He's from South Carolina. Hope it works out well for him. But Liberty was really like, oh no, what are we going to do for our backup quarterback? And yeah, you mentioned Jaden Bradford coming in, but you never want to put all your eggs in one basket, especially when that basket's a true freshman quarterback, right? He's very highly recruited, the highest rated quarterback recruit Liberty ever signed out of high school, coming in out of IMG Academy. He played with some really good, talent down there on his team, and then
football
also
factory, man.
Yeah, they really are. I mean, I watched a video not too long ago on YouTube about just IMG's facilities, and they got better facilities than half the G5 does. It's really impressive. But anyways, I mean, he comes from that type of background, that type of program, so he knows. I don't think it's going to be as huge of a leap for him coming into the G5 as you might have for some other true freshman quarterbacks. But I think in a perfect world, Liberty would like to redshirt him this year, let him have a year to kind of bulk up, learn the system, which Coach Chadwell says he's done a whale of a job learning the system already, just in his, first couple months on campus. But you mentioned Ryan Berger out of App State. He's the guy that Liberty's kind of hoping will kind of, stake claim to that backup spot right this year to kind of. And I mean, he's still got I think 3 years of eligibility remaining, so he's still a young guy too. But if he can kind of solidify himself as the backup to Salter, then you don't have to worry about Bradford. You can keep that red shirt on him, even if Salter unfortunately were to go down to injury and miss any significant time. You got a guy like Berger, and I know the coaching staff was very high on Berger coming in out of App State. He was a starter to start their season last year and had an injury and then kind of derailed his year, but he's from Myrtle Beach High School, so this coaching staff, being from Coastal Carolina, is very familiar with him. They recruited him out of high school and lost that battle to App State, but they're familiar with Berger, and he comes in and, when he started spring practice, he was coming off the flu, and he had lost like 7 or 8 pounds. And I heard from coaches that, that first week or so, they were kind of like, I don't know if this guy is, ready. But as they got to the end of spring practice and in the spring game, he really dazzled. I mean, you could tell by his pocket presence that he's a poised veteran quarterback that has played college football. He also kind of impressed me and surprised me a little bit with his ability to be a dual threat type guy. He was very mobile. He got out of the pocket. And of course, in spring games, I mean, quarterbacks wear the black jerseys, no contact. You get a finger on them, they blow it dead. But he did look very mobile, like he could escape the pocket if things break down. So that's a lot to not really even answer your question. I think this year, perfect scenario, a Bradford redshirts, Berger's the backup, and then going into next year, those two will battle it out. And I know the coaching staff's really high on Bradford, and he's probably the guy of the future. But when does that future start? Is that 2025, or is that maybe even after a year or two of Berger? We'll just have to wait and see.
All right. Well, how would you say like the NIL and the transfer portal has now kind of changed the way that Liberty recruits high school players?
Man, that's a loaded question right there. We talk about that for about an hour. It's funny. So last year, a year ago, Coach Chadwell comes in, takes over for Hugh Freeze, and anytime I think you probably see this at any G5 program, but probably even in Power 5 program. Anytime there's a coaching change, it's like a mass exodus to the portal. And that's what Liberty had last year. So Liberty ended up having to replace 50% of its scholarship athletes going into the 2023 season, and a lot of that was through the portal. I mean, you can't replace 50% of your scholarship players through the high school ranks, especially when you're a brand new coach coming in mid to late December. I mean, most of those kids are already committed somewhere. You might be able to have a few that you flip from your previous school, which Liberty did. TJ Bush was one of those kids that was committed to Coastal, but you just can't do it. Not to mention those kids typically aren't ready to play as freshmen, so you have to get into the portal. So that Liberty was very aggressive last year going into the portal, and I think you're just going to see that every year for G5 schools. It's just the fact of life now, right? You're going to have to be active in the portal. Liberty was a little bit less active this year. I don't have the numbers in front of me. They probably brought in about 8 to 10 guys through the portal. You might see a few more here in the spring, as opposed to I think they had over 20 last year. So I think moving forward, they'll always use the portal, but it'll probably be more plug and play guys. Like you lose a CJ Daniels a year before you were hoping to lose him at receiver. Well, let me go get a Dante Lee to kind of fill in that spot before my high school recruits are polished and ready to go. I think you'll see more of that. Same thing they did it at linebacker this year too. Another guy I should have mentioned was Aiden Vaughn, transfer from Wisconsin, might factor in there as well too. But so I think you'll still see Liberty active there as long as under Coach Chadwell. But I think his preference is to it just be more plug and play for unique situations as opposed to we need to go get 15 to 20 guys that can play immediately. He really wants to build it through high school. But I think in the G5 you're always going to have to be active in that market. With NIL, with the way the portal is, especially with these guys being able to transfer more than one time. It's just the way college football is today.
What have you guys seen any impacts? And I'm sure like probably with the Salter situation, it probably happened, but like in regards to like coaches having to basically re-recruit the teams, players being promised all these things. Like how have you seen any kind of change in philosophies with the coaches or anything like that? Or
Yeah, I think, for Liberty, what I've always heard from the coaches, every sport, football, men's basketball, you can go down the line, is they look at NIL as a way of, retaining their players that they already have, retaining their top players, and rewarding them, even though you can't technically, by the rule, is there's no pay to play or pay
Well,
for
pretty soon they
play.
might be employees of the university.
That's true. Everything changes. Maybe by time this is published, they will be. I don't know. It changes so quick.
Yes,
But
yes.
but I think that's Liberty's kind of main goal with NIL is to be able to keep their players, their top players, out of the portal through NIL, and that's just something they're hoping to do, and they've been pretty successful in doing that to this point in time. Of course, a guy like CJ Daniels was hard to hold on to, and he could have gone just about anywhere he wanted to, and like I said, ended up at LSU, but they did keep Salter out of the portal, which was huge. I mean, if Liberty loses Salter, you kind of like, oh no, we're rebuilding again. But able to keep him, and you could have seen other guys follow after him. Dante Lee had committed to Liberty before Salter entered the portal. The transfer receiver I was talking about. But then once Salter put his name in the portal, Lee decommitted. And then as soon as Salter committed back to Liberty or took his name out of the portal, Lee was back in the boat too. So you could have seen even more of that from, a Quentin Cooley or offensive lineman that said, hey, maybe we should go somewhere else too. So keeping Salter was critical. But yeah, I mean, I think, unfortunately, that's kind of what college football has gotten into. College sports has gotten to is you're not just recruiting high school players, you're also having to recruit the transfer portal, and you're having to recruit your own team every single year, re-recruit them, or however you want to phrase that, to keep them out of the portal the best you can. And you're not going to be 100% successful in that because, like we talked about, guys can go and play elsewhere, and it works out well for them. They can get paid in the short term and also improve their draft stock. Doesn't always work out for everyone, but there are some that it does work out, and I'm all for that free market. I mean, that's what makes America great. So why should college sports be any different? Let them be able to make their money that they can while they can. But you also hope that, again, this is getting off topic. We could talk about this NIL and transfer portal for a long time, but you hope they're getting the good, wise counsel. They have smart guys, smart people that are pouring into them and advising them, rather than, sometimes people, there's dirty people in the business, in the industry,
Absolutely.
that are in there saying,
Where there's money involved, there
exactly.
always is.
Exactly. So you hope, it's happening, and it's unfortunate, but you hope most of the guys are able to listen to the right influences and get the right advice.
So, go ahead, Justice.
No, I was just gonna say, and I think like at some point we're gonna see that pendulum swing where guys like don't necessarily want. The P5 is great and all, but if you're going there and you're not playing, I think at some point the pendulum kind of swings back a little bit, right?
Oh yeah, 100%.
Hey, let me stay at this G5 where I know I'm going to be the starter.
100%. Liberty had an offensive lineman that transferred to P5, and I don't want to mention any names or anything, but he transferred to P5 last year, and he was going to be the team's starter on the offensive line for Liberty last year, and he decided to chase the money. And I don't know if he got the money or how much money he got or anything like that, but I do know that he did not play much, and now he's out of eligibility.
That happens a lot.
It does, and he's out of eligibility, and he's hoping to get drafted, but he didn't get to the combine, and he's probably not going to get drafted. I'm assuming he'll probably get an undrafted free agent contract or something like that. But you sit there and think, would he have been better off seeing at Liberty starting for one of the top teams in the G5 and one of the top teams in the country, one of the top offensive lines in the country? Would that have been better on his resume to eventually, hopefully, get into the NFL? And I guess we'll never know. Hindsight's always 2020, but yeah, it something needs to happen to this. And again, I'm all about the kids being able to maximize their NIL, maximize their earning potential while they can. They're only going to be young and athletic and able to make that money for so long. So I'm all for it. But again, hopefully they're getting the right advice. They have the right people in their ears, and they're not just trying to jump at something. We're getting down into the weeds on it, but I do think that inducements is a big issue in college athletics, with opposing teams, sliding into quote unquote sliding into players DMs during the season when they're having a good year.
Oh,
Hey,
yeah. Oh, yeah.
you know, you should come on over here. We got six figures waiting for you. And then they get there and, you know, it's a third of what they
Absolutely.
said. And you know, that's just something that the NCAA needs to crack down on. I don't know
Tampering.
how they do
That's the best
Tampering.
way to call it.
Yeah, that's the term. But
it happens, and you know, it's a fact of life, and you know, I don't know that the NCAA is ever going to do anything about it personally.
well, I hope they do, because it's kind of
It'd be
ruining
nice if they
college
would,
football. But what can you do?
Yeah.
Or, you know, in the case of, we talked about re-recruiting and kids, it's, you know, I live in the state of Iowa, so there was a particular lineman that I'm thinking of that went to Alabama, that then Caden Proctor then commits to Iowa after Nick Saban leaves, and he mentions at some basketball game that, oh yeah, Iowa, you know, reached out and was talking to me, and you know, after a couple bad games, like, don't worry, you know, you got it. It's like this words of encouragement. You've also got that to, you know, hey, you missed out on this. It's like, oh, don't worry, like, we're still, you know, we still believe in you, this and this, and then get a coach that leaves or whatnot, and then all of a sudden you get a player, you know, that way.
And I think that's the important thing for the G5 specifically, is to maintain those relationships, right? Because you're not going to win every battle, but when that guy does go to the Alabamas of the world or wherever and doesn't get to play, you know, and gets recruited over, then, you know, then maybe he'll consider, you know, coming to a G5 program like Liberty.
Yeah, I mean, you've seen it happen, and you know, it was funny. Before I jumped on with you guys, I saw a guy that Liberty was very hard on, offensive lineman last year in the portal, that they were going after very hard, and you know, it was between him and one other school, and I just saw that he ended up going to another school, but he's back in the portal now again, so looking for another home. It's kind of like, maybe you made the wrong decision. And again, you never know why they made those decisions and what happens. And they got other reasons, you know, sometimes they're be closer to family and things like that. But NIL, transfer portal, it was kind of like those two things are two different things, but they were kind of both implemented within the same time period. And it's become the wild, wild west in college. And you see it all, especially in G5 level, you see it all over college sports, is coaches getting out of it. You know, Nick Saban, for example.
Because they're not a coach anymore. Now they're really a general manager at that point.
Well, in a lot of teams, a lot of schools, you need a general manager. You need somebody that's a full-time position on your staff now that manages your roster, because it's a full-time year-round position, just trying to keep up with it. And it's too much for a head coach to deal with, because a head coach is supposed to be, you can go and recruit high school players, but you also game planning and you know, preparing for the season, that sort of thing. But so many times now they're like we were talking about, re-recruiting their own team year round. And again, we could get into that too, is like, you're not just re-recruiting, but when you know that any of your players at any day could take their first exit ramp into the portal, how does that affect the way you discipline players? How does that affect the way you hand out playing time? You know, there's so much that goes into it, and it affects coaches' daily lives now, that I'm not surprised that when they do, they've also got to be fundraisers, you know, to a certain degree, to help build up the NIL collectives and things like that. So it's a lot that's on their plate. You know, fortunately, most of them, they get paid really nicely, but it's still a lot for them to have to deal with.
Yeah, for sure. Well, going on, like you said, we could go on for forever on this. There's a lot to unpack. You mentioned wide receivers kind of being that spot that they're going to probably attack here in this next portal session or opening. What do you think the strength of this Liberty team is going into 2024?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard not to mention Caden Salter there. I mean, you know what you're getting there, and you know, from everybody I've talked to and from what I've seen, is he had a terrific spring, and I heard that from so many people this spring, just in and around the program, and I was sitting there thinking, that's not the person I expected you to tell me is having a great spring, because I mean, we saw what he did last year. He was a special player, one of the top in the G5, and maybe one of the top quarterbacks in the entire country. And for you to say, oh man, he's turning heads, this kid's special, like, yeah, I already know that. But so it leads me to believe that he's taken that next step this year. But so it's hard not to mention him, but I'm not even mentioning him as the number one thing. I think it's the running game. You got some proven guys on the offensive line that return, a couple of key depth pieces that return. They also brought in a couple of transfers that'll probably fill in some gaps there. So the offensive line should be really good again. And then you got all those running backs back again if they need to stay healthy. But you got Cooley, Lucas, Blue. Maybe even a Caden Williams or a James Jointer, some young guys coming in. You got a lot of names there. A team that led the country in rushing last year, and all those running backs are back. Not to mention the ability of Caden Salter to run as well. In 2023, it had to give opposing defensive coordinators nightmares, keep them up late at night trying to figure out who to stop, how to stop them, how to slow them down. I can't imagine that's not going to be the case once again in 2024.
That's kind of it for our, what we had for questions, John. We want to thank you again for joining us. I would encourage anyone that's looking to learn more about Liberty and Liberty sports in general, or Liberty football specifically, to visit your site. There were 2 recent articles that you wrote, both about the spring game. One kind of, I guess, a recap more, and then one more kind of with the head coach Chadwell's thoughts on how spring went. And they were both excellent, great reads. I would encourage anyone to go read those. Is there anything else that you'd like to share that we haven't talked about with Liberty football?
No, I think we covered it pretty good. I'm looking forward to seeing what happens in 2024, and the schedule will be a little bit tougher. Not the tops in G5, of course. No P5s on the schedule again this year, but you get East Carolina and App State on there. I know East Carolina was down last year, but they're typically a pretty strong team out of the American. And App State, I think, is probably one of the preseason favorites in the Sun Belt again this year. And so those are 2 kind of marquee games in the non-conference. So I'm looking forward to those. But yeah, I think we kind of covered it good. Appreciate you guys for having me on, and appreciate what you guys do for G5 football. It's a fun time to be in the G5, and I'm looking forward to having one of us. Hopefully, in my opinion, it's Liberty, but looking forward to having a G5 team in the CFP next year. It should be a lot of fun, and as we enter into this new era of college football. But stay tuned. Yeah, any Liberty fans or those interested in Liberty, Conference USA fans or App State fans that'll be facing Liberty here in the fall. We got a lot more coverage coming out in this spring. Really, once basketball season kind of wraps up here in another week or so, we'll continue to cover Liberty football and a little bit more recap on their spring so far. But thanks so much for having me on.
Thank you. And you can find John at A Sea of Red, your website at seaofred.com. Like I said, definitely check it out if you're looking for more information. And thanks again for your time, John. It's greatly appreciated.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.